For the Sake of My Children, a novel by Dr. A. Ahmed. This is an intriguing epic story which resonates with love, resilience, courage, and sacrifice. Copyrights. All rights are reserved. No part of this book may be reproduced, stored in a retrieval system, or transmitted in any form or by any means without the prior written permission of the author, except by a reviewer, who may quote brief paragraphs for a review to be printed in a public newspaper, general magazine, school journal, or university article. This novel narrates the life story of an Australian girl who fell in love with a Saudi man. Then she converted to Islam, married her Arab lover, and traveled with him to the Islamic world. This novel is a work of fiction, but the entire story is based on a true love affair between a former Christian girl and a Muslim immigrant. All names, characters, places, and events are either the product of the author's imagination or used literary. Therefore, any resemblance to actual people, living or dead, events, or locales is merely coincidental. Chapter 5. The Deadly Disease of the Sahara Desert. From Jeddah International Airport, the Australian family traveled by an air-conditioned bus to the holy city of Mecca. Then they were housed in a VIP tent. It is customary during the Hajj season for pilgrims from Western countries such as America, Canada, Australia, and some European countries to be accommodated in the so-called VIP tents. Pilgrims from African and Asian countries such as Nigeria, Somalia, Egypt, Sudan, India, Afghanistan, Iran, Pakistan, and Indonesia will be stuffed like eggs in small cardboard boxes or sardines in narrow tins. In ordinary tents crowded as hell. Even pilgrims who come from poor countries in the Middle East will stay in those ugly tents. The difference between the two types of tents is like the difference between West and East, the first world and the third world, and heaven and hell. Therefore, Mustafa, Irshad, and their 2 children did not suffer much during their temporary stay in those classified tents. Their suffering began when the family started to perform Hajj. They must move from one place to another under the scorching sun of the Sahara Desert. The Australian wife felt as if the sun was raining hot acid on her tender body. Her 2 children get sick every now and then. They must take their young children to the doctor every day. While circumambulating around the Kaaba and stoning the devil, Irshad passed out several times and was constantly suffering from nausea. When the pilgrims climbed Mount Arafat, the Australian wife almost died. She fell to the ground unconscious. Then the ambulance quickly took her to the hospital, half dead. Her Saudi husband refused to accompany her to the hospital for fear of not completing the rituals of Hajj. According to the authentic hadith of the Prophet Muhammad, Hajj is Arafat. Therefore, any pilgrim who does not complete his standing on Mount Arafat is considered invalid, and therefore he wasted his time and money. Unless he returns next year and repeats the rituals of Hajj from the beginning, he will not please God. Accordingly, the Hajj of the Australian wife was considered by her Saudi husband as a waste of time and money because it is not acceptable to God and His noble messenger. In other words, sickness before Allah God is not an excuse for abstaining from the rituals of Hajj. Whoever dies while performing the rituals of Hajj dies as a martyr and enters paradise. He marries 72 virgins in the case of a male and does not receive anything in the event of the death of a female while performing the rituals of Hajj. The Prophet Muhammad predicted that most Muslim women would end up in hellfire and be tormented forever and ever. The white woman, Irshad al-Shamari, stayed in the intensive care unit inside the hospital for 3 weeks, battling death. During that period, her soul remained suspended halfway between heaven and earth. The hospital informed her Saudi husband that his foreign wife had contracted a severe form of the disease called meningeal or alcihai in Arabic. It happened to her due to heat stroke from the extreme heat. The disease caused severe damage to her spinal cord and affected her brain. If she survives this disease, she may lose her mental strength and become like a vegetable. 3 weeks later, Irshad's body was transferred to a large hospital in the Saudi capital, Riyadh City. The hospital is known as the Royal Hospital. Most of its medical staff consists of highly qualified foreign doctors and nurses, all from Western countries. Once the Australian wife was brought to the royal hospital, her Saudi husband was informed that she needed to have 2 major surgeries on her brain and back. The 2 surgeries may take a minimum of 8 to 10 hours and will be performed by 2 highly qualified neurosurgeons. Mustafa is not bothered by how risky the surgery is and how long it might take, but the huge amount demanded by the royal hospital is his main concern. He could never dream of having such a huge amount of money even if he had to work for the rest of his life. When the hospital authorities realized that the Arab husband would not be able to pay the huge sum, they cancelled the scheduled surgeries and released his ailing Australian wife. Irshad was half dead when she was sent or expelled from the royal hospital. By then, the Australian family was completely broke. The Saudi husband spent what he had on hospitalization and transporting his Australian wife from one place to another. He spent most of the time either in the hospital or in the hotel. Besides the unsurmountable problem of his sick foreign wife, he has to take care of his 2 young children. The children were also hospitalized several times during those days due to illness. After that, Mustafa was able to contact some of his uncles and cousins in the city where he was born and where he lived for 15 years before his mother, Zainab, took him with his siblings to Jordan to join his father, Sheikh al-Shamari. His relatives managed to collect some money and send it to him. None of his relatives could give him the big amount of money the royal hospital demanded. When his sick wife was discharged from the royal hospital, his late father's elder brother invited him to come and stay at his house until his foreign wife was fit to return to Australia. Mustafa accepted his uncle's invitation and traveled with his family to the city of Dammam. Upon their arrival, the Australian family was accommodated in one of the uncle's homes. The uncle has 4 houses and 4 wives. The foreign family has been kept in the care and custody of the uncle's first wife because she is over 60 years of age, and all her sons and daughters are already married and have moved somewhere in the country. Mustafa's uncle rarely comes to visit his first wife. He spends most of his time with his 4th wife, who is 16 years of age. When this underage young wife married Mustafa's uncle, she was only 12 years old. Because of her youthful age and beauty, the uncle hardly sleeps with any of his 3 other wives. She became his favorite and beloved wife, as was the child bride Aisha with her husband, the Prophet Muhammad. Out of religious and social duties, the uncle visits his other 3 wives at least once a week. Meanwhile, the sick wife, Irshad, is still unaware of the world around her. She remained in a coma and was moved from one hospital to another and placed in a wheelchair. It is not welcome in Saudi Arabia for an Arab man to marry a foreign woman, especially a white woman. Doing so is against the law of the kingdom. Moreover, the law completely prohibits a Saudi woman from marrying a non-Saudi man, even if that man is an Arab and a Muslim like herself. Therefore, the uncle's first wife is not happy to have a white woman in her home and under her care. Adding to the first wife's anger was the fact that the Australian wife was extremely ill when she came to stay with her. But as a Muslim woman, she knows that the consequences will be dire if she refuses to submit to the decision of her polygamous Muslim husband. While the Australian wife is still fighting for her survival, her Saudi husband has already made up his mind and decided to live permanently in his home country. Mustafa always felt that, despite his desire, his parents separated him from his country and took him to Jordan. When his mother immigrated to Australia, Mustafa felt uprooted from his Arab culture and values. He had always longed for his people and Islamic culture. This longing caused in him a resentment towards Western culture. His Western wife, Irshad, noticed that since his feet touched the soil of Saudi Arabia, her Arab husband, Mustafa, had changed a lot. He started talking to everyone he meets and is always happy most of the time. While in Australia, most of the time he was very lonely and gloomy. The Australian wife Irshad felt as if a new personality had taken over once her Saudi husband returned to the land where he was born and raised. The uncle forced his elderly first wife to become a nurse for Mustafa's foreign wife and a babysitter for his 2 young children. Through the recommendation of his influential uncle, who has profound influence in society, the Saudi husband, Mustafa, found work in a foreign company. He is now working as a translator from English to Arabic. Meanwhile, Irshad was put on a powerful treatment prescribed by a hospital in Dammam City. It took her body more than 6 months to overcome that deadly disease. Her recovery was slow and took an extraordinarily long time. Gradually, she becomes aware of herself and the world around her. And the doctors of Dammam Hospital considered it a great miracle that a foreign woman could overcome this kind of deadly disease without any surgery. After spending half a year in this vegetable state, not only did she realize the world around her, but she also began to talk and walk. Once she recovered, the Australian wife asked her Arab husband to take her and their 2 children to Australia. The white wife became terribly angry when she learned that her Saudi husband had already decided to live permanently in his home country. Irshad couldn't believe her ears when Mustafa asked her to go back alone if she didn't want to live with him in his country. She knows she can do anything in life except to separate herself from her daughter, Aisha, and her son, Abu Bakr. Her stubborn Arab husband put his foot on the ground and said in no uncertain terms that he and his 2 children would not leave their Muslim country and return to the land of the infidels. Meanwhile, the Australian wife cries day and night and begs her Saudi husband to keep his promise and return with her and their 2 children to Sydney, Australia, but her pleas and tears are ignored. Chapter 6. Irshad doubts the hadiths of the Prophet Muhammad on female genital mutilation. The Australian woman found herself imprisoned in the 4 corners of her apartment in Dammam City, in the Islamic Kingdom of Tartarus. She can't go out without her Arab husband. There is no entertainment in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. The entire kingdom has no cinemas, public parks, beaches, swimming pools, nightclubs, bars, or liquor stores. The Australian wife can go out with her Saudi husband once or twice a month and go to the supermarket, which is a few meters away from her apartment. Whenever she went out, her husband forced her to cover her entire body from head to toe with a huge black abaya and a dark niqab. On a few occasions, the foreign wife was invited to some weddings by her Arab husband's relatives. Whenever she went to those weddings, she only spent time with women. Her husband entered the house through a different door, and she and her children entered the women's section through another. These 2 sections were separated like public washrooms by a high wall. Women cannot advance to the men's division, and men cannot dare to appear in the women's taboo arena. Saudi women speak Arabic, which is difficult for the Australian wife Irshad to understand. None of these Arab women know a word of English or French. Whenever the foreign wife tried to talk to them in her broken Arabic, they would make fun of her ridiculous accent, and that always discouraged her from speaking to them. Therefore, she hates going to those weddings, but her Saudi husband always forces her to accompany him. Another thing Irshad hates at those celebrations is the way the guests eat their food. It is mandatory in Islam for people to eat food together on the same plate and drink water from the same cup. It was disgusting to Irshad when she saw more than 20 women dipping pieces of bread in the same bowl. The most delicious dish for the Saudi people is eating the whole lamb. The whole lamb will be roasted and stuffed with rice and some other spices. This roasted lamb is then served on a huge tray and served to the guests. At least 20 women will be invited to gather around this cooked lamb and consume as much of it as they can. Another type of compulsory social gathering that the Australian wife Irshad hates is offering condolences to some relatives who have lost a member. Women are not allowed to go to the funeral procession. They are expected to gather in their taboo section and mourn the relatives of that dead person. The Australian wife does not like the way these Arab women express their grief. She often saw some of them covering their heads with real dust and ashes and wailing and bewailing and rolling on the ground as if they were epileptics. If the deceased was a relative of her Saudi husband Mustafa, such as his uncle, cousin, or aunt's daughter, then his Australian wife, Irshad, and her children are supposed to sleep for a week in the house of that deceased relative. In such a case, no one is allowed to sleep on a bed or mattress except on the floor. Irshad must struggle for a week sleeping on a hard floor with her young children. However, another ceremony that the foreign wife and her Arab husband must attend is the circumcision of young boys and the female genital mutilation or amputation of the sexual organs of young girls. This sinister procedure must be performed as soon as the boy or girl reaches the age of 4 or 5. The Australian wife knows that female genital mutilation is an abuse and a crime against a Muslim girl, but whenever she protests against it, her husband silences her through the hadith of the Prophet, in which he said, "Circumcision is a sunnah for men and a preservation of honor for women." Sunan Abu Dawud. This hadith was interpreted to mean that circumcision helps or preserves the honor of a Muslim woman. The Prophet Muhammad also believed that circumcision makes women more pleasurable if it is practiced in moderation. This belief is confirmed in another hadith in which it says, Amatiyah al-Ansariya told that a woman used to circumcise girls in Medina, and the Prophet said to her, "Do not be negligent in that, because this makes the woman the best and she is the most acceptance of the husband." Mentioned in Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, and transmitted in Tahara 49, Shaltit, Kaitan al-Antha, in Liwa al-Islam, 1951, page 55. The favorite wife of the Prophet Aisha narrated another authentic hadith on the authority of the Prophet, may God's prayers and peace be upon him, in which he said, "If a man sits between her 4 branches, the arms and legs of his wife, and circumcision touches circumcision, they must perform ghusl or purify the body." Sahih Muslim, hadith number 349. With the 2 circumcised parts, the Prophet of Islam intended to say the circumcised penis of the husband and the circumcised pussy of his wife when they met during sex. This means that the Prophet of Islam endorsed such an evil practice against women, which in the Islamic community is called the happy occasion of circumcision of girls. It is correctly called female genital mutilation. It is so named because it destroys and mutilates the genital organs of women. There is another practice that the Australian wife abhors, which is the marriage of underage girls. Often, child marriages between the ages of 10 and 11 were attended. Sometimes, in these child marriage ceremonies, Irshad met the underage married girls who were impregnated by their husbands when they were 12 or 13 years old. As usual, whenever the white wife expressed her anger to her Arab husband for this kind of abuse of female children, he confronted her with a verse from the Holy Quran and the hadith of the Prophet Muhammad. The Prophet wrote the marriage contract with Aisha when she was 6 years old, and he consummated the marriage with her when she was 9 years old, and she stayed with him for 9 years until his death. Sahih al-Bukhari, Book 62, hadith number 89. The Quran also allows men to marry underage girls. As for your women past the age of menstruation, in case you do not know, their waiting period is 3 months, and those who have not menstruated as well. As for those who are pregnant, their waiting period ends with delivery. See Surah Al-Talaq, 65, verse 4. Quranic commentator Ibn Kathir explained the previous verse with the following words. There are 3 types of women. 1. Old women and those whose menstruation has stopped. 2. Those young girls who have not yet experienced their menstruation. And underage girls who have not yet reached puberty. If they marry and divorce them, must stay 3 months before they can marry again. 3. The 3rd type of women who are still menstruating or pregnant. These women must stay 3 months and 10 days before remarrying. Although living with Mustafa proved to Irshad that he was neither a saint nor an angel, she remained faithful to him and true to her Islamic faith. One way or another, she has turned a blind eye to all the abuses that Muslim women are subjected to in the Islamic community. She has always convinced herself that the unbeatable problem is not in the Quran and the hadiths of the Prophet, but rather in the interpretations of those divine texts. The Australian wife believes that if these sacred texts are subject to better reading and understanding, then the Islamic society will be a perfect society. And Muslims will become angels or like gods on earth, as the Hindus believe that the Brahmins are the gods in the form of human beings in the Hindu society. This blind belief of the Australian wife was shaken one day when she got into a serious quarrel with her Saudi husband. The fight occurred one evening after the foreign family had returned from a celebration of female genital mutilation of 5-year-old twin sisters. The screams and agony of these 2 little girls as their circumciser subjected them to such cruel and painful torture haunted the Australian wife's mind as a horrific nightmare. When she got home, She talked to her Saudi husband about it and expressed her doubts about the authenticity of those hadiths that justified such a vicious practice of the ancient Arab barbarians. When Mustafa confronted her, as usual, with two hadiths in Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, and no Muslim scholar can dare to doubt the authenticity of a hadith mentioned in the two collections of hadiths, the Australian wife commented with the words of doubt that turned her Saudi husband into a voracious animal. Maybe the hadiths are authentic, and the Prophet Muhammad authorized this practice, but female genital mutilation abuses and harms women, Irshad said. Do you want to tell me that our Prophet Muhammad, may God bless him and grant him peace, recommended a practice that is harmful and offensive to women? Mustafa shouted at the top of his voice. While I was a student at the University of Sydney in Australia, I read many research papers conducted by highly qualified researchers on this procedure, and they collectively proved that FGM has serious consequences for Muslim women. According to the World Health Organization, there are 125 million circumcised Muslim women who live today with mutilated genitals. Irshad waited for a response, and when her husband remained silent, she resumed the matter. I remembered reading an article that said that female genital mutilation or cutting involves removing the seal of the labia majora and labia minora together after complete removal of the clitoris. Quoted in an article by Lois 1985, page 115. The problems resulting from female genital mutilation are that women are no longer able to have normal intercourse and have children. She could no longer satisfy her husband's appetite, and for that reason would be dismissed in favor of a younger, healthier wife. Quoted in the same article by Lois 1985, page 117. I don't care what these damned enemies of Islam wrote about female circumcision. I repeat my question for the last time. Do you want to say that our blessed prophet commanded us to harm our young girls and abuse our women? The Australian wife kept silent. She prefers not to say something because she is afraid she may offend her angry Arab husband. You should know that our blessed prophet Muhammad was infallible in everything he said and did in his life. Therefore, you must answer my question right now. What the Prophet permitted may have been acceptable at that time for a 7th century society in Arabia, but today's scientific research has proven that female genital mutilation or circumcision of Muslim little girls is harmful to women. Don't you know that Islam is applicable in all times and places? I don't know what you are trying to prove to me, but there is one thing I am sure of. This practice of FGM is evil, barbaric, and hurts women. When the Australian wife finished the above sentence, she felt as if a hammer had hit her face. Her Saudi husband hit her directly on the nose. It was an extremely powerful blow that turned her body upside down and sent her straight to the ground. Then Irshad saw Mustafa jump over her body and start hitting her as if he were hitting a dangerous wild beast and wanted to subdue it before it could attack him again. When Mustafa got tired of the repeated beatings on his surrendered wife's body, he grabbed her neck and began to strangle her. Irshad knew her end had come. The last thing she remembers is the screams of her 2 young children, after which she fainted as she lay dying at the hands of her enraged Arab husband. In Saudi Arabia and many other Muslim countries, neighbors cannot dare to interfere between a husband and his wife. No matter what happens between the family members, it must remain within the 4 corners of that house. If the neighbors tried to intervene to save the wife's life from being slaughtered by her angry husband or the crying girl from being beaten to death by her angry father or brother, their blood would be on their shoulders. There is number 911 police number to call in all Muslim countries. The police may come to the crime scene only after the murder has been committed, and this is rare. Hundreds of wives were killed and thousands of daughters and sisters slaughtered in honor killings, and their cases remained within the confines of their homes. Their murdered bodies were either buried in the compound of the house or immersed in pits somewhere in the wilderness or thrown into the sea. Then their families say that they either committed suicide or fled when their families discovered that they had become pregnant outside the sanctity of an Islamic marriage. If not for a miracle that happened at that last moment when her soul was leaving her body, Irshad would have been strangled to death by her enraged husband. It so happened that while her husband was strangling her neck when blinded by his zeal and love for the Prophet Muhammad, someone broke down the door and saved her in the nick of time, and that person was none other than Mustafa's uncle. The uncle came to discuss some religious issues with his nephew. When no one answered his knock on the door and he heard the beating and the screams of the children, he realized what was going on and broke down the door just in time. The extremely angry husband and uncle struggled for a few minutes before Irshad's neck was freed from the former's firm grip by the latter. However, Mustafa continued to fight with his uncle and tried to free himself to finish the job. His uncle is tall and strong and thus manages to overpower his nephew and pushes him into a room and locks him there. On that day, the uncle wished he had arrived an hour later after knowing the reason for his nephew's righteous anger. Then he rebuked the Australian woman, blamed her, and warned her to be careful of her words when she talks about the blessed messenger Muhammad. May God bless him and grant him peace. He also lectured her about her limitations as a Muslim woman. He conveyed to her the famous saying that all Muslim scholars and leaders say and used to silence any Muslim who dares question or debate a Sharia law or religious practice supported by a verse of the Quran or an authentic hadith of the Prophet. Do not debate. And do not argue about Islamic law. Moreover, the uncle recommended to the white woman the importance of hadiths. According to him, there is no difference between the verses of the Holy Quran and the authentic hadiths of the Prophet regarding the issue of Sharia. He cited a verse from the Quran to prove his point. It is believed that the authentic hadith is no less than a revelation because the Quran says about Muhammad, he does not speak out of low desires. He is nothing but a revelation. And the star when it descends 1. What misleads your companion and what deceives 2. And what speaks of desire 3. He is only a revelation revealed 4. His knowledge is powerful 5. Surah An-Najm 53, verses 1-5. The only difference between the Quran and the Hadith is that while the former was revealed directly through the angel Gabriel with the same letters that God personified, the latter was revealed without letters and words on the tongue of the Prophet. Therefore, the Quran strongly attests to the importance and validity of the Hadith and does not allow Muslims to choose between the two. And it is not for a believing man or a believing woman, when God and His Messenger have decreed a matter, that they have any choice in their matter. To him, he has clearly gone astray.
Surah Al-Ahzab 33, verse 36.
This means that when God and the Messenger decide something, it is not for a Muslim man or a believing woman to follow a path of his or her choice. The Muslim husband, Mustafa, did not want to forgive his infidel wife, Irshad, at first. He even announced her divorce in front of his uncle. Nevertheless, the uncle persuaded him to forgive her and take her as a wife for the sake of his children. The nephew reluctantly gave in to his uncle's pressure and annulled his first divorce. Despite this change of mind, it was considered the number 1 divorce against Mustafa's Australian wife. In Islam, the husband has the right to divorce his wife twice and take her back, but if he divorces her for the 3rd time, he cannot take her back unless she marries another man. Then that man divorces her after having sex with her. The Quran said, divorce is twice, Surah Al-Baqarah 2, verse 229, and if he divorced her, the 3rd time, then she is not lawful for him after that until she marries another husband. And if the other husband divorces her, there is no sin for them to reunite. The Quran also says, if he divorces her, then she is not lawful for him after that until she marries another husband. Thinking that they maintain the limits of God and these are the limits of God that he makes clear to people who know, Surah Al-Baqarah 2, verse 230. On that day, the uncle and his nephew Mustafa did not allow the white woman Irshad to sleep until she scolded the devil, confessed her infidelity, and asked God to forgive her, and repented of her apostasy with her knees bent and hot tears flooding her eyes and wet her face and clothes. In addition, the Australian wife that day had a completely different picture of Islam. When she was in Australia, she learned that Islam honored women and elevated them to a higher status than any other religion in the world. Also, that day, she was told that as a woman she would not be able to understand everything in Islamic law because she was inferior to men in religion and intellect. And the messenger said the woman is deficient in religion and reason. As a defective and deficient creature of God, she is unable to understand the law of God and his prophet. The messenger of God once said to a group of women, "I have not seen anyone weaker than you in intelligence and religion." Sahih al-Bukhari. Muslims believe that this is why God never entrusted important matters in Islamic society to women, such as interpreting religious texts and leading the country as Khalifa. Prophet Muhammad said, "Those who entrust their affairs to a woman will never know prosperity." Based on this hadith, Sharia law in Muslim countries will not allow women to be presidents, judges, lawyers, or lead prayers like an imama. It is not permissible for a woman to lead men in prayer at all, even if they are minors. According to Sharia, a woman is completely ineligible to conduct a marriage contract either by herself or by someone else, although her guardian must authorize her to do so. A father can marry his virgin daughter without asking for her consent, regardless of her age. As a result of these teachings on women, the white woman Irshad was really deceived into believing that there were some faults in her understanding and not in religion. According to this ancient religious argument, things can seem bad and irrational to our minds because we are sinful human beings with limited understanding, while God is holy and infinite. When Allah commanded or his messenger commanded something, we should follow it blindly without questioning. Accordingly, the Australian wife Irshad on that day was not only led to confession and repentance, but also swore by God, his holy book, and his sacred house, the Black Kaaba in Mecca City, that she should never again argue or question the authenticity of a verse of the Holy Quran or a hadith that true to the Prophet Muhammad. These Islamic beliefs, practices, and rituals are final and binding forever. The Saudi husband and his Arab uncle told the Australian wife that she should blindly believe in all the teachings of the Holy Quran and the sacred hadiths in the blessed Sunnah of the infallible Prophet of God, Muhammad ibn Abdullah ibn Kilab. The Muslim wife Irshad accepted her destiny in life and completely and utterly obeyed her abusive Arab husband, Mustafa. Since that day, whenever she disobeyed him or did something he considered wrong, he was always hitting her. She did not and was not able to question him or challenge his authority whenever domestic violence occurred. The religious justification for the husband's right to beat his disobedient or rebellious wife is mentioned in the Quran as clearly as the sun. Men are the maintainers of women because God has made some of them superior to others and because they spend of their wealth to the unseen as God has preserved. And those from whom you fear disobedience, admonish them, and leave them in the beds and beat them. Surah An-Nisa 4, verse 34. Not only does this verse allow a man to beat his rebellious wife, but even if her husband suspects or fears her disobedience, he is empowered by God in the Holy Quran to hit her. Therefore, the Muslim man, as a husband, father, or brother, Islam allows him to strike the body of his disobedient wife, daughter, or sister with his stick or whip until she changes, repents, becomes submissive, and shows complete obedience to him.